If you're like me, you'll have noticed there's been an awful lot of fragrance releases over the last few years, but surprisingly enough, not a whole lot of difference. Everything seems pretty uniform, and a lot of things smell the same. Everything feels pretty boring. But it's not just fragrance. This is a cultural-wide phenomenon. A lot of the business models that are information-based tend to have flattened out the culture, homogenized the culture. You can see it most when it comes to music, especially for people aged 16 to 24. The number one music genre for them is hip-hop. But the number two, terrifyingly, is 90s music. Basically music that was made before they were even born. The current economic model, streaming, doesn't support their individuality, their life experience. And so they have to look back in order to find something that they can relate to on a human level. The same thing is happening with fragrance. Now, we're nowhere near what's going on with that generation, but things are definitely flattening out.
When I was a child, I used to play with fragrances of my mother. I actually mixed them one to each other. And I was so obsessed with fragrance, and I loved the smell of coffee, although I never drink any. But then I put a coffee bean in my nose because I wanted the smell to stay all day long. And I ended up in the hospital because we had to take it out. It had gone way up, too far up in my nose. I loved fragrance. I think it's very much, when you're a perfumer, I really think it's also that your relation to the outer world is very much, it is very rich through the smell.
Daniela Andre is a master perfumer at Givaudan, and between 2003 and 2020, she was the main driving fragrance force at the House of Prada. Now in 2020, Coty, which is a fashion conglomerate, acquired the House of Prada from Puig, which is also a fashion conglomerate. And so things changed. Andre stepped back from being the perfumer for the main pillars of the house, which turned out to be Paradox and Paradigm. I don't know about you, but I really like her. She seems warm, gentle, thoughtful, sophisticated. And fortunately for us, that personality comes through in her fragrances. They tend to be more mature. They tend to be really elegant. And to me, that's a form of self-expression. That's a form of art. She treats fragrances like they're art. Andre, not surprisingly, is my favorite perfumer, and because of that, Prada is my favorite house. Mainly because, I like who she is. I like what she stands for. I like to stand for those things too, right? So my sense of who I am, my style, is reflected in the fragrances she makes. Unfortunately for me, when Coty took over, the aesthetics of the house got very different. And you can see it very clearly with the perfumers. Normally, if you have one, maybe two perfumers, you're looking at something that is more arts-oriented. But once you start getting into three perfumers or more, you're getting into compromises. You're getting into smoothing out the rough edges, the individuality of the distinct perfumers, and you're getting something corporate. You're getting something mass appealing. And that's happened to Prada for both their men's and women's fragrance line, and it's very frustrating. The best example of what's going on in Prada right now, and if I'm being honest, it is not just Prada. This is happening in a lot of places. But the best example is the first major release, which was the original Paradox. And if you look in the comments of Fragrantica, it's just different versions of the same thing. Safe, inoffensive, nice but uninteresting, generic. I mean, they're all basically saying the fragrance is boring. It's nice, but it's boring. And honestly, that's exactly what I felt when I tried Paradigm for the first time. And that was the impetus for this video. It was just so uninteresting. And the first and third fragrances were pretty much like that. Miguel Matos from Fragrantica has a really good article on Virtual Flower, which was the third fragrance release. But what happened with the second release, the intense version, was probably even worse. Because the year before, another Italian house released a fragrance called Viva Voce Intense. And that was a sweet citrus floral that had a mossy feel to it. And what did Prada do? They released the exact same style of fragrance a year later. And not only that, even the juice was a similar color. There's just no attempt at innovation. The Valentino had sold well, and Prada said, hey, let's just give them more of the same thing. And sadly, the intense version did sell very well, but there was no attempt at innovation. There was an attempt to pad their bank account basically by making just more of the same. This is a 21st century phenomenon, though. It's a homogenization of culture. It's a corporatization of culture. It's more about making money than making things interesting and fun. I like to think of fragrance collecting. It's like collecting little works of art, basically. This is Amber Pour Homme. This is an Andrier. I have 8 Andriers. It's kind of like collecting painting or even music, right? If you collect vintage records, you probably have a lot of records. But you've got your favorites, right? So maybe you like Bruce Springsteen. You've got more of him than everybody else. So when he comes to town, you actually go and pay to see him because you identify with Springsteen. Like, he's your guy. Like, that's who you are a little bit too, right? But when you flatten everything out and homogenize everything, fragrance will become like the K-Tel records you used to get back in the 70s. They appeal to your parents. They were good. They had good songs on it, but there was no identity. It appealed to everybody. They had no soul. When you were young, you were looking for soul. You were looking for identity. You were looking to belong. But you don't belong when you've got the K-Tel records. You don't belong with the modern corporatization of fragrances either. At this point, I'm sure there are a lot of people thinking, well, designer are meant to be mass appealing. Niche is where you go to when you're looking for innovation. And that's definitely true. Even though there are a lot of creative designer houses, niche normally is what we should be looking for. But there's so much money in fragrance now that big niche houses especially are starting to chase trends rather than set them. I look at something like Parfum de Marly, really good house, very, very popular, but they've always really been, at their core, a designer house. I think of Parfum de Marly as being a high-end designer house rather than a truly innovative niche house. Now that used to be Creed. I'm reading a book right now for the second time called The Ghost Perfumer, and it's really about the house of Creed and how Pierre Bourdon, somebody who saw himself as an artist, not as, a marketer or a perfumer, he was first and foremost an artist, and he had a massive impact on the house. Way more than most people realize. He's responsible for Green Irish Tweed, Millésime Impérial, Silver Mountain Water. But further to that, he trained Jean-Christophe Hérault for 8 years, and Hérault is the creator of Aventus. And if you want to know where the pineapple note came from, Bourdon used that in a dozen different fragrances. That's where Hérault got the idea for pineapple. So Bourdon has got his fingerprints all over the house of Creed. Unfortunately, in 2020, Olivier Creed sold the house to BlackRock, who in turn sold it to Kering. So now, instead of Creed setting the tone and being innovative, they're following trends. This whole Amber Universe line of fragrances is Creed following the sweet fragrance trend rather than setting them. So that's definitely 2 niche houses that have moved away from creativity and started to follow the money. There are a lot of niche houses out there doing things differently, making creative fragrances. But unfortunately, at the same time, we're getting flooded with new releases. Like a dozen or 2 dozen every single day. So it makes it harder and harder to find them. And then you would think with all of the new releases, there's got to be lots of different things out there. Until you look at the flankers. Lancome's La Vie est Belle is a perfect example of what's going on. La Vie est Belle was the #1 fragrance of the 2010s for women. And this is a comparison between La Vie est Belle and the fragrances that smell the closest to it. The fragrance that I'm talking about is La Vie est Belle Eau de Parfum Légère. And it smells like just about every other flanker from La Vie est Belle. So there's, they all smell the same. That's not creativity, that's not art, that's marketing. It's not just Lancôme, and it's not just La Vie est Belle. Emporio Armani's Strong With You line might be the worst offender. I bought Absolutely 2 or 3 years ago, and I really like it. It's got the Strong With You DNA with rum. And then I thought, I'm going to try something else in the line. So I got the sandalwood version. The problem is they smell 90% the same. All you've got is rum here and sandalwood here. They just made small tweaks and they sold it as 2 different fragrances. It's basically the same thing. You get the same effect when you go to the Stronger With You website on Fragrantica and go to the Smells Like section. You're almost always going to get other Stronger With You flankers. The #1 culprit with music was the new technology of the information age. It was streaming. Now, it's not exactly the same when it comes to fragrances. There's different forces at work with fragrances, but it's having the same effect, and it does bug me. The reason I made this video is because the one group that can actually do something about this is us. It's the fragrance community. It's people that have watched this video all the way to the end. It's people that have collections that are, 10 or 20 or even more. People that are really into and care about this and identify this as a big part of their lives. Because the clone houses and the Middle Eastern houses, they're not going to do anything about it. The only reason they exist is because the Western houses have stopped doing their job. They've stopped creating variety. If they were doing their job and creating a variety of fragrances like they used to, the clone houses wouldn't be able to keep up. It just wouldn't be worth their while. So yeah, I do think we can affect change, especially with our wallets. Like, what do we buy? Be really careful. At least I tend to be careful, at least now after Emporio Armani, with flankers. I'm tired of seeing the same thing and smelling like the same thing. Then there's also the Fragrantica year-end polls. I'm really careful how I vote in those things because industry does listen. They really do care. Sales go up on a regular basis for the winners of the Fragrantica polls. A lot of the other awards are industry insiders voting, but we actually get to vote on Fragrantica. And quite frankly, I like it. I like the fact that we can vote and we can have our say. I do tend to express my opinion a lot in the comments section as well. I get frustrated with people sometimes. There's all kinds of different ways that we can affect change because we do care about this stuff, I think, more than most people. And I really do think that the fragrance industry, especially in the Western world, has stopped doing their job. They've stopped creating art, and they care more about balance sheets than anything else. Thanks for watching.